En este vídeo vamos a ver un simulacro de prueba técnica para conseguir trabajo en remoto en Estados Unidos utilizando la plataforma de Arc.dev. La entrevista es completamente en inglés, así que si no entiendes inglés te recomiendo que actives al menos los subtítulos automáticos. La entrevista dura más o menos una hora y empezamos con un live coding con código en vivo y luego continuamos con algunas preguntas técnicas. La prueba, como verás, no fue preparada y por eso me puedes ver un poco nerviosillo, pero creo que aún así es muy útil, te puede ayudar un montón en tus próximos procesos y espero que lo disfrutes. Si te gusta, ya sabes, machaca el like para que me anime a hacer este tipo de contenido. A disfrutarlo. Hey Justin, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm
Hi.
doing well. How are you doing?
Well, I'm a bit nervous to be honest, a little bit.
Okay.
So how are you doing? Everything's good?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How about yourself? I know you said you're nervous, but I don't think there's anything to be nervous about. I'm sure we'll do fine, right?
Okay, I hope so. I hope so. I think it's going to be fun. I don't know. Do you want to begin or do you want to share some information?
Yeah, I don't know how much information you shared before I came in. I know I joined and I heard you talking a little bit about it. But for those of you who aren't familiar, maybe I'm just rehashing stuff at this. Okay, ARC
Yeah.
website. Great. Yeah. So we're a platform for you to help you find a role ultimately. There's lots of different programs per se that we have for you to help find that. We have ways for companies to apply to you. We have ways for you to apply to companies very traditionally. I don't want to get too much into nitty gritty for that. For those details, you can of course go on arc.dev and learn all about it. But really, we're here to help you find a role. We are international. We have people located all over the world, and these roles are remote. And yeah, I don't want to hash too much about this because I know people are here to watch me grill Miguel a little bit. So
And just to be clear, the tech interview that we are gonna do today is like this one in order to get featured to companies and land a remote job in 14 days.
yeah. So part of the appeal of Arc is that everyone who comes in here as a developer, we want to make sure they go through this assessment process that we have. That way, we make sure that clients who are coming in are comfortable and are confident that the developers that they meet on Arc are those of high quality, right? And high quality is a really generic term, but ultimately, we value two things here at Arc. You have to be a good communicator and you have to have strong technical expertise, right? And it's not like you have to be like 100% very strong communication, 100% strong with the technologies of your choice. We want to, part of the vetting, part of the process is that number one, we want to make sure that you're someone that we would personally vouch for to work with clients, right? That's the first piece. And the second piece is while we're talking to you through this assessment that we're about to do, I'm not just going here going, okay, did Miguel say the wrong thing? Oh, that's a fail, right? I'm not just trying to actively fail people. I'm trying to understand what their strengths are so that we can also take notes, understand that, okay, Miguel, the developer, he's really strong with these technologies. He has exposure to these things so that if there's a client who specifically needs strengths in the latter, then maybe he's not the best fit, but he's also really good at explaining things in this detail. So if you need someone who's more senior working with other individuals, maybe he's a good fit for that, right? So this is not one directional. I'm not just here trying to take information from you and failing you. I'm trying to make this bi-directional where I try to understand you, and at the same time, hopefully, you also learn a little bit about the ARC process along the way.
Okay. Thank you so much for the introduction because I think that clears it up. So let's begin, Justin. All yours.
Okay, cool. So how this is going to work is we're going to start with a coding exercise,
Okay.
and we'll spend about up to 30 minutes on this. It's okay if we end early. That's totally fine. If we hit 30 minutes, I will cut us off
Okay.
with some leeway just to make sure we have some time for other questions. After that, we're going to go over some generic Q&A questions that don't involve any like programming, just to see where your strengths lie. And these are very open-ended. There's no right answers or anything like that.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. So if you wouldn't mind getting started by sharing a screen with your development environment of your choice, you can use any programming language you'd like to use. And while you're doing that, I'm going to send you some sample data that we can look at. Great. So is this the screen that you'll be using?
Yes, this is something that is called Run.js. It's like a playground with JavaScript, and you could put on the left some data, and you have the result on the right.
Cool. All right. So private chat is okay, right? Like sending a message through that. I think it truncated it. Okay, perfect. Okay, so this looks kind of daunting. Let me just give you a quick overview, right?
Okay.
So this is a bunch of data. The top one is a directory of people, right? We have people's names, their ages. You can think of this as a phone book or your contacts list on your phone. The second piece, the second array, is a bunch of registrations. So you can imagine maybe you are hosting an event and some people came in and they put their names down on here. Okay.
Okay.
So what we want to do today is we want to write a function that will perform a join, inner join. So just quick check. Are you familiar with what inner joins are with like with MySQL and so forth?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we want to perform a join and ultimately have this return an output that has the join parameters that we want. So let's say I take these, for this function, we want to pass in 3 parameters. We want to pass in one list of objects, which would be the directory. We want to pass in a second list of objects, which would be the registrations. And we want to pass in some kind of key. So this would be a string. And that key would be correlated to the field name that we want to perform the join on. And for simplicity's sake, we can just assume that whatever we're returning in this join is going to pretty much look exactly what we have here. I know that the bottom registrations has like an additional field, but you can just assume it's a flat object with just key value pairs. There's not going to be anything nested, nothing complicated there.
Okay.
Cool. All right. So I'll just give you a key. Okay. So that's the prompt. But before we dive in, I'm just going to give you a few like prefaces. Okay. So performance is nice, but it's not important. We don't have to worry about that right now. We can talk about that later, right? So just whatever approach makes the most sense to you, we can just go with that approach, right? And we can make this as collaborative as we need it to be. So if you're the type of person who performs to code like heads down, that's fine. I'm not going to talk to you and interrupt your train of thought, but if you have questions, feel free to ask. And if you need to look up syntax or anything, that's totally fine. My ask is just don't go on Google and type, oh, how do I perform inner join with JavaScript? Something like that, right?
Can I use GitHub Copilot?
I'm
joking.
I was like, I don't want to say no, but
yeah, right. Okay. Okay, anything else about something that I should keep it in mind?
No, I think this is very open-ended. Like, feel free to do whatever it is that makes you most comfortable, right? Like, if you're the type of person that writes tests, if you're the person that likes to like run through debuggers, we want to make this as close to a environment where you would be realistically working in as much as possible. So just I'll have you take it away, and I'm right here. Questions, anything like that. Like, I want to be able to like help you as well, right?
Okay. Well, okay, perfect. So inner join with JavaScript. Let's think about it. Could I write like a simpler example of it in order to try it with?
Absolutely.
Okay, so maybe it take a while, but I think maybe it's worth it. Like having something simpler. And what I'm going to do is having like a simpler one in order to be sure that this is working as expected. So we have like, if I remember correctly, the inner join should not like, if in this example, I don't know if it's this correct. I don't remember quite, but I think that if this ID is not here, it shouldn't be in the result. Is that right?
Yeah, so this one might be a little funky just because we have different notions of ID here. For simplicity's sake, if we're gonna condense this, maybe we can, instead of calling an ID in the second list, we can call it something else. Unless you're performing the join on the, sorry.
Yeah, so I think that the expected output would be something like, like this with the correct name here. Because we don't have this in the B and we don't have this in the A. So the expected output should be something like this.
So let's make that for sorry, I'm pointing here. For the second list, let's make that ID for Miguel's email as 0, and then the ID for the response as 0, because ID will be our join column here.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So if you say, okay, perform a join on parameters A, parameter B, and string with ID, this will be the exact response that we want.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. Okay, so let's create the function inner join, and we have the left array. Sorry, I'm gonna go to Discord because it's giving me some notification.
Yeah.
We have this and the key. I'm going to import assert from node assert strict, and the idea would be that we have the left array A, B, and the key would be ID. And assert the inner join, this function should be this expected. Okay, so we have the error here. Check that this is working as expected. No, it's not working as expected. Sorry. Okay, perfect. Let's begin.
Nice.
So, the first thing, in order to be, because the first thing that I'm thinking about is about the most usual one, about a nested loop, you know?
Okay.
First a loop and inside another loop. That would be like maybe the easier one, but something that I think that could be interesting here, I'm sorry, but if we have here like this email here, it should be like with the ID 2 for the expected
Yeah.
output. Okay, okay. So, but I think that maybe one idea could be to have some kind of map for the first one. So we have a map, and we could the left array iterate it over with a for each.
Okay.
And for each item, I would create like a new item in the map with this ID, the ID that we have here. Not the ID, but the key that we want to use from the parameter. That will be the ID. And I'm going to save the item. And I'm doing this in order to avoid like having nested loops, in order to be more clear how to get this item from this array. In order to find, I'm going to just simplify like having a map in order to check.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Okay, and then maybe we could improve the code, but for now I'm going to just create the join an empty array. I know that maybe the most I don't know, the senior way would be to use reduce. I'm not a big fan of reduce because sometimes it's a bit complicated, the readability of it. Maybe it's like, I don't know, I have like 15 years of experience and I have to read twice the reduce.
It's not
in order
as
to understand.
maintainable sometimes. It's harder to read. Makes perfect sense, right?
So I'm going to use another for each. I could use another thing, but for now, in order to be clear and try to get it working, I have here the right item. So the idea now would be to, from the right item, to get the data from the left, from this map. So let's try to get from the right item key. That should be the same ID. Yeah, that would be. I'm trying to grab the information of this ID from the left, and what I'm going to do is, if the left item is undefined, I'm going to just return. I'm not going to do anything else because I don't want to put it. I'm not going to put this information. For example, we have this one. The 2 is going to be. I'm going to try to get the info from this 2. I'm not going to retrieve it because it's not here. So I'm going to return it. And now what I have to do is push. I'm going to push the left item that I suppose I have and the rest of the right item. And okay. And I have to return this because if not, it's not going to work. Okay, this seems to work for now, at least for this example.
Nice.
Okay, the inner join, left array. I think this is correct. For example, if I put here an A, okay, this is not working as I expect. Okay. And if I change this, okay, this is not working. Perfect. At least it's working. I think it's working. I'm going to try to use this example that seems to be a bit more complicated.
Do you mind just like console outing the output from the
Yeah.
example you have right now? I just like to see it.
Yeah, sure. It's me confident about the deep strict equal, but it's
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
okay. Yeah. So this is the output. Yeah, the good thing about the Run.js playground is that like you see here the line number of the console
Yeah.
log, and then you have exactly the line number.
Oh, that's very useful.
Yeah, super useful. It's very nice. That's why you have that blank space, because they want to just put in the right spot.
Right.
It's very
Okay.
interesting. Okay, so let's try with the directory.
Yeah, so for that one, I'll let you get that set up, but I think we can do a join on the name. The ID might be a little funky. I think the name will be a good join parameter. I intentionally use like the same like names consistently.
Perfect. Okay. Name, phone, confirm, Maggie. Okay, because I see that there is some duplicated properties.
Yeah.
But I don't
I think we can look at the phone and the confirmed fields as the ones that would be joined across the two.
Yeah, I see that now. The problem is that, yeah, the ID is not the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for example, Aaron, we have like an ID with 7, and here we have the ID with 3. I don't
So I'm very
know.
glad you noticed that. That's why I recommended joining on a name, because this table here, it's kind of the ID would be for the, if we imagine these as like database tables, right? The ID would be for the actual table itself, not for the person necessarily. So in our case here, let's not worry about that. We'll just take whatever ID is being put in. We don't have to do a merge or reconciliation for that, because in a normal case, we'd want to rename them. So it's like registration ID, but for our purposes right now, it's not necessary.
Yeah. We could we could use object keys in order to check all the keys in order to avoid like the collision, and rename with the tricky part would be the renaming, because we could like left ID, right ID, and that would something that we could do. But for the rest, I would say that is what we expect.
Yeah, I think this looks great.
Okay.
So normally I would have asked you about how you would handle this ID, but you started talking about it yourself. So I think that's great, right? I don't want us to write any code for it. It's a little bit, it's not as simple as this, because you have to like start jumbling around with your code, but it's just something I like to talk about, right? So I think this looks really good. I really like it. Let's take this and let's talk about it, right? We don't have to write any code, but let's imagine we take this function and maybe it becomes part of a REST API. So possibly we stick this behind Node Express. Now that there's this API endpoint, you can pass in this JSON object where you can specify left array, you can specify right array, you can specify the key. So as a property of being a RESTful API endpoint, we could have a lot of concurrent requests, right? So you can imagine a lot of people are calling this and doing joins on their data sets. So because of that, you can imagine we can have like 300, 400 requests per second and so forth. So if that is the context that we have to solve for, what are your thoughts about how you would make this function be able to handle that, right? Either what you would do in the code or how you would deploy the code in order to handle that type of load that's coming in.
Okay. Wow, that's a great question.
Just so you know, there's no wrong answer. It's very open-ended. So
with a lot of
just comfort.
Yeah, with a lot of layers. First of all, something that I would consider is trying to avoid to I don't know how to say in English, but to mess with the event loop, because if we mess with the event loop and we have loops like with the for each, if we do something inside the loops that is blocking the event loop, that is something that is going to cost a lot of performance and problems for sure, because if we have a lot of concurrency, we are going to suffer even timeouts at the end. So something that I would have very care would be trying to avoid blocking the event loop. And for that, I would check. Obviously, this example is not going to block the event loop. It's going to block something, but not something to consider. But maybe if we evolve this method to do some kind of operations inside, I would be careful with that.
Mhm.
After that, thinking about having a REST API for it, I think that's something that would be great in order to scale, not in terms of code, but in terms of infrastructure, would be to use like edge functions, something like Cloudflare workers. First, because you have the possibility of deploy the edge function very near the user, and then you are not gonna to the user is not gonna pay the latency when using this function. And
Mhm.
something that would be great is that edge functions from, for example, Cloudflare workers, you have some kind of Redis, and maybe we could consider to cache some kind of operations, not in this method because we are not querying the database, but I'm guessing that you are asking more about the concurrency of database, and maybe we could try to like move some kind of work in order to be cached from the to Redis or the key value database from Cloudflare workers or something similar, to try to avoid that. And the good thing with the edge functions would be that they scale like very easy, very cheap, and indefinitely. So that would be a problem anymore. Besides that, for sure, we should be careful about the join, because join is a very expensive operation. And in terms of database, we should consider which database we are going to use. If we are going to use joins, maybe we should consider using a NoSQL, because um, if we are doing a lot of operations, the problem with SQL is that they don't scale that very good. They scale like vertically. You have to improve your machine, or you have to do sharding or something like that, and it's not something good in terms of
Mhm.
performance. So yeah, that's,
Yeah,
I don't know. I
absolutely.
don't. It's
I
fine.
think those are
I
all
don't
great
want to be
ideas. Yeah.
like. It's
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I consider something from the code in the node, something from the infrastructure of deploying the code for the REST API, and in terms of database. But well, it's very soon to know about the database. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's talk about the caching piece, right?
Okay.
So you talked about possibly caching. If we're looking at the example that we have here, so we can ignore using like a database internally
Mm,
for just like feature wise, right? Maybe we want a database for caching, but if this is what we have and this is what we're supporting,
mm,
um, what are some caveats with caching, right? Because
yeah.
caching is very useful, but there are some trade-offs and there's some
Yeah.
like gotchas that come into play. So
Yeah.
I'm looking at this, I see possibly some things that could go wrong, but also
Mhm,
things that could work really well. So what are your thoughts about like the
yeah.
trade-offs there?
Yeah, that's great, because you know that they say that there are two things very difficult. The most difficult things in programming is caching and naming variables, and that's true. And the problem, obviously, if we only have this set of data, it doesn't matter to cache. I mean, it's not worth it. But the problem with caching is to have in sync with the database. So we have to be careful, because obviously, if you cache some data, how do you handle the variation? No, the when you want to refresh the cache, you have to be careful with every time that the, I don't know, Maggie is updating the phone on the
Hmm.
database. Then you have to like have some kind of process in order to be sure that the cache is not with stale data. And if we have a lot of operations, like a lot of operations of updating and writing, this is going to be a problem. And even not with the IDs for sure, but for example, we have here the registrations. Imagine that we are catching the registrations and we have a cache of 1 hour. The problem with that is that maybe Elizabeth is confirming after 5 minutes, and we are not going to see this result. So we have to be
Absolutely.
careful with that. With the I don't know the name. I have the name in the tongue, but I don't know. When you want to refresh, there's a verb for that, and I don't remember now.
Oh, like oh man, now I'm forgetting it too.
Yeah,
Like invalidate the cache?
invalidate the cache. Yeah, thank you. It's an easy one, and I forget about it. Update. Yeah, the chat is telling me some
Right.
secret. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
update. But invalidate is
You've got
the
a team
correct word.
behind
Yeah.
you.
Invalidating is the most challenge with the cache, and
Right.
we have to be careful with that. I mean, the idea of the cache would be, for example, in this kind of data set, maybe it's not worth it, but I don't know, maybe if we have some data that is huge from the directory, maybe we have like the address of the user, not only the phone. And the phone, the address, maybe that's not data that is going to change that much. And maybe we could have like a cache of 30 minutes, 1 hour, and maybe it's not that critical. So I would say like we have to be careful like with this flag of the confirm, but it seems to be very important. And it's something that it seems that we could change very easy.
Right.
But the phone is not something that the people is changing every hour, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really good to look at the data and just kind of keep in context for what that is, right? Like a
Exactly.
person's age is not going to change twice a year. Person's
Exactly.
phone number is relatively static, right? So
Exactly.
that's really good that you're looking at the data model itself.
Hmm.
Great. Awesome. So I'm going to throw one more curveball at you for this problem, right?
Okay.
So again, no code needed, but you brought up a great point about big, like large sets of data. So this is a REST API. You can pass in data with the JSON body. Now let's imagine that some guy got really bored and he took the US Census data, which is lots of people, and he started sending this into the API. I don't even know how many rows that is, but you can assume it's millions of rows of data. So size-wise, that's pretty big, right?
Hmm.
So what are your thoughts on that? Like, do we want to support it? Like, just if you built this API, right, and the project manager says, Miguel, we have a problem. We're seeing this type of data coming. What's your like initial response? What's your thought process?
Well, my initial response would be, why do you need to do that? I mean, I need to understand the challenge or the problem that is facing or why is doing that, and why a normal way to do, or maybe why do you need that, and what the amount of data you need to send, and what could we do in order to avoid if we are facing some kind of problems of costs or maybe of scaling, in order to know if, well, it's something that you are gonna do maybe once a week or once a month, once a year, or are you gonna do this every 2 minutes?
Right.
In order to understand if it's something that is going to be once a year, maybe we don't have a problem. What we could do is create some kind of side process besides the REST API, in order to have a way to insert the data maybe in the database with another different process, more low level, but maybe that we don't need this kind of API. But if something that is going to be very useful, um, I maybe instead of using the same API as some user, maybe we should create a new endpoint that could be more prepared for bulk data,
Yeah.
in order to avoid this kind of scaling problems, and to be sure that we could validate like a huge amount of data instead of using the same one by one request, or trying to be sure that that is going to be quick, that is not going to interfere with the rest of the API, and that is going to solve the problem that they have.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think those are all great ideas. And frankly, like a lot of these are things that people do in the real world, right?
Yeah.
Like if something like this comes in, That's a pretty big data set. Like the code we have here probably won't work on a single node. You might have to
Yeah.
like scale it with like big data solutions or something, right? So I think you're
Yeah.
spot on
You know, the thing is that I experienced that in my
there.
work. We had this problem. You know that sometimes when you are working in a large company, so people from marketing or maybe another different department from development, so they see that they have like available an endpoint, and they see, I have a way to insert some data. I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna
Right.
write a small script, and I'm gonna insert million of I don't know, the points of interest. In my case, in my company, it's a real estate agency, and they wanted to add like point of interest in a map, and they wanted to add like millions of it. uh, and they didn't like they didn't ask, they just do it.
Oh no.
Yeah, and it's different when you are creating an endpoint for from a user perspective, that you are gonna insert one point of interest, or two, or maybe five, but you are not gonna put 1 million. And suddenly in Datadog we started seeing like the
It's like
amount of time, yeah, the amount of
right.
time that the request needed in order to put data. It was like, and it was like doing timeouts, and that was a problem because people couldn't use the map because
Yeah.
the database was like stuck. And the thing was, why are you doing that? Well, I saw a REST API to insert a point of interest, and I used it. Yeah, we have sometimes to like, we have to be sure that the API endpoint, you could do that to insert some data, but it's not like the same when you are inserting one data, or one row, or you are trying to insert like hundreds of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting in order to explain
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's when a lot of like defensive programming comes in. I've been in
Yeah.
the same boat, right? But not that exact same situation. But someone finds your stuff, they start using it, abusing it. You could do
Yeah.
like API keys to lock down and like rate limit it based off of that. There's so many
Yeah.
options, but it's
Yeah.
it's a common problem. So it's great that you've encountered it.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously in our case we have rate limit, and the thing is that we have a rate limit, a simple rate limit with Express, and they hit it. But what they did was to try to jump over it
Yeah,
using our services, like Amazon and VPNs with different machines, like adding data with some clouds. So it was funny.
right.
We were
Cool.
attacking ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah, absolutely. That's great. I
Yeah,
mean, not great, but you know what I mean.
yeah. It's a
Awesome.
good experience to live. Yeah,
Yeah. Great. So this is good. I think we can wrap up the coding portion, but I just wanted to call something out really quick. So if you don't mind scrolling down a little
yeah,
bit in
sure.
the code you have, I don't normally do this,
Okay.
but so from line like 42 to 54. So here, when you were writing this, you talked about using for each and not using something complicated like reduce. I think this is really good. To me, it's a sign of seniority when someone is able to like justify the decisions they're trying to do in a way that makes the most sense. And the justification here is that depending on who is supporting this code, who's looking at this code, you might not want to use something that's a little bit harder to read, harder to digest, right? Because the reality is not everyone who's coding in JavaScript or even in general is as familiar with functional paradigms, right? So
Yeah,
here you're just using for each. It's simple, it gets straight to the point, and it works really well. So I talk to people sometimes who kind of freeze a little bit because they want to do something really fancy. They want to impress me, but
yeah,
frankly, as the interviewer, I'm not impressed by you using like fancy functional programming, fancy like constructs of your language. I want to see that you're doing something that makes most sense and you can justify your decision. So I
yeah.
just wanted to say, like, I really like when you did that there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, sometimes it's like the same. I do interviews in my company, and they try to use reduce, and even sometimes they struggle trying to
Yeah,
use it or understanding. And it's like, for me, the most important thing first when I wrote the code was I'm going to try to understand the code me, for the beginning, no?
Good.
And also trying to think about if not only you but the people from the chat, they are checking the code, and in order to understand as soon as possible. So for example, for me, I had my times of thinking about functional programming, trying to not mutate anything, and sometimes it's even worse. For example, in this case, about creating this variable. So sometimes there are people that are like afraid of creating a variable because of optimizations and so on, and they do something like, I don't know, with the reduce, they try something like that. It's pseudo code, but they do for the accumulator, they do something like this,
Yeah,
like this, join, and then this, and this code that seems to be
that's
better.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful, but the problem is that you are like recreating a new array in each iteration, and it's expensive. It
Yeah.
seems to be great, but it's because you are not like creating. It's beautiful because you are returning the join directly, but the problem is with this, and you have to be careful with this, because then what you are trying to avoid about talking about optimizations, complexity, not only about time but space complexity, and
Yeah.
then suddenly it's worse. So sometimes if the variable is very near the method, I don't care about creating a method and mutating directly if it's like 4 or 5 lines away. If it's like 100 lines away, I would be more, I don't know, like concerned. But in this case, I think it's more readable for the people and for me.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with. Yeah, it's a common thing, right? Like things kind of work in like small sandboxes, and unfortunately,
Yeah,
when people are using things like this, they don't always understand how it works internally. And
yeah,
if I had followed up with the scaling question and you had wrote it that way, it'd be like, I might have to rewrite this whole thing.
yeah,
So yeah,
exactly.
this looks good. So let's stop the screen share here, and we can move
Okay,
over to some general like Q&A type of questions.
okay, perfect.
Cool. So you mentioned MongoDB earlier, and as well as the context of databases, right? Relational databases specifically. So I just want to ask you a little bit about your thoughts between when you would make the decision to choose using a no relational database such as MongoDB versus using a traditional relational database like Postgres, MySQL. So you can imagine maybe you're coming in to build a new project for a client. It's going to be maybe kind of a big project, right? So like
Mm.
what's your thought process behind that?
Hmm. Well, it's a sometimes it's a complicated decision. I have to be honest. I mean, I'm not a database expert, but I had to work with databases in my times. For me, if if you know for sure that it's going to be a huge project and you have a lot of read and writes, and it's something that needs to be scaled fast, you need usually you need no SQL, because you could scale horizontally and it's easier, it's cheaper, it's faster in terms of scaling, and even something that is not necessarily good about the document model, because it's not forcing you an schema. But in terms of the beginning of a huge project or something that that could be big, it's something good not having this kind of schema, because it's something that it lets you to go faster and adapt to the changes. For example, imagine that you are creating Twitter and you have like you are not exactly, you don't know if you need likes, if you likes and comments, or downvotes, and then if you have a schema, adapt to those changes quickly is going to cost, not
It'll take a bit of
only,
time to move. Yeah.
yeah, not only it costs money, but it's gonna cost a lot of hours in order to be sure that the schema is updated in a lot of things. But with NoSQL, you could just update the document. You could even have some documents that are not following the same schema. That is something that could be dangerous sometimes.
Yeah.
but it lets you go faster. But not always going to NoSQL could be the solution. For example, when you have like a small startup, you are not sure about if you need, or you don't have still the problem of scaling, but you need you have the problem with being sure that everybody knows the logic business. The schema should be very rigid. Maybe it makes sense in order to have a SQL. And sometimes even you could try to bootstrap some ideas with SQLite. I started a lot of ideas with SQLite.
Right.
And after that, you could move to PostgreSQL. It's pretty easy. And right now, there are some great solutions like Prisma that you could create some kind of abstraction of your database. You could start with SQLite. And then when you want to deploy that, it makes sense. For example, for something that could be a blog, the structure is not going to change that much. It's not going something that it's very easy to cache. So you don't need the writes. When the write operations are not that usual, and the read could be cache. So it could make sense, SQL like Postgre or MySQL. And that's why WordPress, they have MySQL, because it makes sense. But
Right.
if you have a Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, I think it's a better idea having a NoSQL. The only thing, I remember some experiences,
Okay.
about NoSQL, and it's the problem with the integrity of the data, and
Yeah.
that's something that a lot of times happens, and it's not that important. But if that is important for you, you have to go to SQL. For example,
Right.
sometimes you could go to a video of YouTube and you see that they have like 100 views and 200 likes, and you are like, that's not possible.
Right.
How could be that you have more likes than views? And that's because they are using some kind of NoSQL, and the data sometimes is the integrity of the data sometimes is not exactly the same, in terms of, because maybe the documents are in different bases. So you have to be careful with that, because if it's not important, like this, it's not important about the views. Maybe after 10 seconds it's going to get updated accordingly.
Hmm.
Is that not the problem? Then you could use NoSQL, but you have to be careful about this, because sometimes you have the same data repeated in different collections and documents, and you have to update them. And maybe it's difficult to update them at the same time.
Yeah.
It
Because
costs
it's not transactional. Yeah.
exactly, because it's not transnational. Exactly.
Great. So you brought up a really interesting point about like data integrity, like schema with regards to using like document database versus relational database, right? So if we imagine, let's say you're working at Twitter, like year one, right? And you're using MongoDB to set up all of your data. I'm not saying that that's what they do, but let's just imagine this is like a hypothetical situation, right? So everything's great. And 10 years down the line, you've become this really big company, but you're seeing a lot of issues with not using a schema that's enforced by a database. So maybe you introduce a new feature, likes on tweets, and now because there's lots of different teams that use this, it's causing some people's data to break because they have some assumptions for how it's structured. So so that's just the example, right? So my question for you is, have you worked with this type of situation where not having a schema with a document database became an issue down the line? And if
Yeah.
so, what kind of like approaches or strategies did you use to alleviate that?
Yeah. So I had the same problem. I worked in a startup company from Norway, that it was about articles, like sharing news articles to a lot of products. And the problem is that we needed a lot of changes on the collections and the documents. And the problem is, it was like, wow, right now it's like a mess because we don't have any schema. In our case, what we did was, well, there's some kind of data model or something like this with MongoDB, I'm not familiar with, but I know that there's some kind of modeling that you could do right now. But in our case, what we did was to use some kind of ORM, like Mongoose, in order to be
Hmm.
sure that we had a more control about. Well, in our times, in my times, we didn't have TypeScript, so it wasn't. It was even more interesting having this kind of object relation model, because if not, it was very difficult in order to know the properties that we were using, creating, and even for inserting the data. It was very dangerous because we weren't aware about the object we were putting there. So I think that some kind of control like this, I know that it's not the same, but some kind of Prisma, um, like Mongoose, something like that, in order to be sure that you are using some kind of schema. In fact,
Right.
Mongoose, you have this kind of schema.
Yeah.
And then you could do some kind of migrations even in order to deprecate some of the. We did that to deprecate some of the properties to be sure to know which one is going to be used and which one not. So this could be a strategy. Yeah.
Absolutely. Great. Yeah, absolutely. I've used Mongoose before in the past. Like it definitely alleviates a lot of these like pressures that you might feel if you're running into this situation. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's great.
It was
Cool.
because when I started with MongoDB, it was like Mongoose. It didn't exist yet. It didn't exist yet,
Right.
and it was so painful because MongoDB is great, but we had this about inserting documents, and we were putting the JSON directly to the collection,
Ooh,
and
okay.
it was like a mess, and we had typos. We had to do some kind of migration in order to be sure that, like, normalizing all the documents of the collection, and it was like millions of documents.
Ooh,
So yeah, when Mongoose existed, it was like wow, and we started using Mongoose, and it make the difference.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you said that, I felt a little bit of pain in there because I've experienced that as well. So
Yeah.
that's great. Cool. All right. So I've been talking a lot about like databases. Let's talk a little bit about like a different topic, just so we cover some more breadth, right? So I
Okay.
want to talk about application deployment.
Okay.
So there's so many different ways to get your code into a live environment, but based off of your experience, off of the excuse me.
No problem.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So based off your own experience working with like deploying applications, right?
Mhm.
Let's imagine that you're working locally, you've written some code and it works pretty well on your like local environment, and you want to roll it out into production. So this is maybe it's a startup, right? And you want to build out this process pipeline, so like technical and non-technical, right? What are your thoughts about how you would build that out?
Hmm. Well, for sure, we need some kind of continuous integration. Well, from the local, I will start from the local in order to create some kind of hooks, Git hooks, in order to be sure that people is not pushing some code with errors from the linter, or even with the ground commit messages. So it would be like the first defense, but that's not enough. That's like only in order to avoid people wasting time waiting
Right.
for the continuous integration. And I would build some kind of continuous integration like Travis or GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions are very, very awesome. Um, and I would be sure to, again, lint the code, but only the files that we change, that the people push, only the files change. Because for me, continuous integration is very important, but it should be fast. Because if not, we have a continuous integration of 1 hour. It's like a lot of things could happen, and you are
Right.
getting bored, and you don't care about it. So we have to make sure that it's fast, that we could parallelize the jobs that we want to do. For example, I would create the install of all the dependencies. I would then have different jobs like the linter, all the testing, not only about the unit testing, but every kind of testing that we have, all in parallel, like the end-to-end testing. And I would build the application, and it's very important to build the application in continuous integration and not in local, because people could link their packages, change the node modules.
Absolutely.
So you don't control that kind of system. So it's very important to build the project in the continuous integration to make sure all the tests are passing there, and you don't have the kind of message, in my machine works. Well, if in the continuous integration is not working, then it's a
That's
no-go.
more important, yeah.
Exactly. And after that, unit testing, end-to-end testing, that for sure. And after that, I would, there are some kind of something that could be interesting even for startups at the beginning, because the cost is very small, and I think that you get a lot of insights, is to, when the, like, having some kind of data, the how many continuous integration are failing, and the amount of time that it gets, the amount of fixes that you are putting, in order to get some metrics. Like, if we have a continuous integration but we are pushing, and 50% of the times we are getting some error, we
Yeah.
have to check it out, because if not, it doesn't make sense to have a continuous integration that is not working.
Absolutely.
So after all the test and deploying, creating a Docker file in order to be sure that we could, like, put this Docker anywhere in any system and deploy, we could deploy it in Vercel. I mean, the hosting is not the problem, because right now we have like 1 million possibilities.
There's so many
maybe
options, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe for a startup could be interesting to start with something like Amazon, because they have a free tier, and normally you want to, I don't know, to have more services. You would like to have a load balancer. For me, I would go directly to Vercel or Netlify or something like that, in order to avoid problems with infrastructure. Because
Yeah.
if not, because another thing to do in the continuous integration would be to be sure to put in a CDN the resources. And sometimes it could be something interesting in terms, if you have people around the world, could be interesting to put these resources near them. And yeah, that would be all. Well, and something that for me is very important could be the notify in Slack the deployment went well, notify as well in the GitHub the pull request.
Absolutely.
You have this URL, you could check the preview, or if there's any error, this is the error. And for me, the web performance is very important. So I think that it could be interesting as well to check Lighthouse CI, in order to check if the application has some kind of web performance regression, in order to avoid, because the problem sometimes is that you are like adding small amounts of regressions, and after 1
Yeah.
month or 2 months, suddenly you are
It starts
like,
to build up.
yeah, what happened
Yeah.
here? So
Like, oh,
yeah.
Lighthouse went from 90 to like 5. Oh no.
Exactly. What happened here? Yeah. So that would be more or less my approach.
Yeah, that's great. I'm happy you called out some decisions that you would make because it's startup versus like if it wasn't, because it's a good distinction, right? Not everyone's gonna have the same deployment pipeline.
Yeah.
Depends on your resources, depends on
Exactly.
like level of complexity you want to like spend upfront building it and so forth.
Yeah.
So absolutely. Great. So you brought up some really good points about observability, about testing. So I just want to kind of dive into that a little bit as well, right? Because
Okay.
a common problem I see with application development is that a lot of more, I want to say like junior folks, imagine that creating and deploying an application is just writing code and pushing it somewhere, and that's it. But you brought up some great points, notifications, about like dashboards. Observability is such a big piece, right? We want to be able to understand the performance, the metrics for the stuff we're building so that we know how to improve it. So again, very open-ended question, but let's talk about like what you would do in like same context, right? Startup, deployment pipeline. But if you were to have like metrics captured, tools, things that you would like listen or look for, what does that kind of look like so that you can optimize for how you would have like a feedback loop for the things you've built?
Okay. So for me, there are like, well, let's talk about observability, and then later I would talk about accelerate metrics, because I think that developer experience and giving the user as soon as possible what they need. It's important. But
Right.
about observability, for sure, today or nowadays there are a lot of services that they are very great, and they are a bit expensive, but it's worth it. Like, for example, New Relic, Datadog APM. In order to Datadog APM, it's like very easy to use, but the problem is that it's a bit expensive. But I think,
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's very expensive. The thing is that a startup that is at the beginning, you don't have time in order to build observability. As you mentioned, it's something that is difficult, and a lot of people is not concerned about doing a good observability. It takes a lot of times. So for me, I would start with something like Datadog APM in order to be sure that I could be sure that everything is working as expected. Even if it's expensive, it's worth it because you need to be sure that your product is working out there.
Right.
Users are not having problems. APIs are responding what they have to respond, and Datadog is great in order to not only get alerts and alerts that you could configure, but to go deeper. To have some insights where you have to prioritize. You have an API that is slow in order even to improve the product metrics. If you have an API that is slow when you are buying something, for sure you are losing money, so you need to focus on there. And the observability should be done not only on the backend, that is something that I saw a lot of times, but on the front end as well. You could do some real user metrics. You could capture very easy the errors, even promises that are not handled. You could check even if the app is not working in some browsers. And the great thing about APM is that you get a lot of data. You get the version of the browser, you get everything, the user
Right.
agent, but you have the filter for it. And the great thing about going for APM, and I mean, it's not like I'm selling APM.
I'm,
It's
I'm,
not.
I'm thinking like they should sponsor you or something.
Yeah, yeah,
Send you a
yeah,
gift
yeah.
box.
It's not a sponsor. I swear. There are other options like Sentry, for example. Sentry is great, but APM goes deeper. For example, with APM, you could like connect the same request from the database from to the front end, and have the user all the request journey, and that's great. Even when you are starting, because when you are starting, it's like when you're a startup, because I was in a startup. I have been in Typeform and in the Norwegian startup, and you want to do observability, and it's something that is great to have. But when you are two people, it's like, okay, I want to do observability, but I don't have the time, but it would be great. So pay for it.
Right. Very useful.
Don't, yeah, very useful to have it, but you don't have the time in order to configure as you want. So at the beginning, I would do that, but if the startup goes bigger and bigger, I would try to create some kind of grafana, to having, because it's very expensive, and having some kind of parts with some great observability that you are building with your exact needs, and put this kind of data to Grafana. It's cheap, it's great. You even could combine with Datadog or Grafana or something like that, and you could get some kind of interesting things. And as I said, not only about the backend or requests with that, but even with the web performance, you could do some real user monitoring in order to put that data in the Datadog, and in order to know, okay, the user are using, have a good experience using our product. So you could know with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very happy you bring up like again like the business context, right?
Yeah,
Because when we're doing problem solving, it's not just taking something and applying to it. Taking everything has a cost, be it technical
yeah,
cost, time cost, money cost.
yeah,
So talking about like what you would do because of like constraints that you have based off of money, time, team, it's great.
yeah.
I think it makes a lot of sense. So I'm happy you brought those things up.
Thanks. It's because I felt it. It's a
Me too.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I have been in startups. Now I'm in a large company, and you see this kind of different approaches. And in the large company, it's like, pay for everything, or you could or pay for everything, or you have a team that is working on it, like experimentation. so you don't have to bother about how
Right.
to do an A/B testing. You don't worry about it. There is a team for it, and even for the infrastructure, you don't worry about it. But when you are in a startup, it's different. Not only about cost, but time. Time is the most expensive asset.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they want
Yeah.
things fast. They want
Yeah.
things
You
to
can't buy more of that either. People
ex-
can't fund you with more time.
exactly, exactly. That's it.
Yeah. Great. Awesome. Well, thank you for going through that. That's all the questions I want to ask you today, Miguel. So I'm very happy to say that I'm not passing. No, I'm just kidding. No,
No,
it's
no.
yeah. So yeah, no. But overall, thank you for going through everything. Thank you for coding in front of me. I know it's not the most comfortable, but unfortunately, this is like the best thing that we have is to try to make people as comfortable as possible while being able to validate that they can actually produce quality code, right? So thank you for going through that. Thanks for answering all my questions. I think you had a lot of great thoughts and great ideas. So um, that's all I want to ask. So I guess I'll hand it off to you now. You can take back control of this and steer how you want to go. You can ask me questions. You can ask me to leave so you can talk to your viewers without me here. Whatever you want.
Yeah, chat. If you have any questions to Justin, please just put the questions on in the chat, and we will ask them. Justin, it was very funny. I mean, I was nervous. I have to say, I was nervous because I haven't been in a tech interview for like 5 or 6 years.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah,
So do you
I
like
think you did very
doing?
well.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. It was you are a great interviewer, I have to say, because I felt comfortable, and something that you do that I think it's very important, and a lot of people, I don't know, they don't do. It's like you say the things that I did great, even if I did something wrong, and this is something very important. Even you say like, I like that you said, and it's like you are listening to me and you are like comforting me. So I felt that. I felt like at the beginning I was nervous, but you said something about the code that it makes sense. I like that.
Right.
And it was like more comfortable and more comfortable. And I hope that more tech interviewers do that, So congratulations for that, because
Oh, thank
no,
you. I really
not
appreciate that.
everyone does that, and I think it's very important. So
Yeah, yeah, I really appreciate that. Like honestly, so that's great. Yeah, when I interview people, I've done a lot of interviews on the other side.
yeah,
It's not always the best experience. You get like really
yeah,
nervous. Sometimes the person doesn't even want to. It feels like they don't want to be there,
yeah,
and it's just not a pleasant experience, right? So whenever someone's coming in through here, I want to make sure that while still understanding that they're going through an interview, regardless, it's going to be stressful, right? But I want to make it
yeah,
as comfortable as possible. Make sure that while they're going through it, they're giving their best performance. Again, understanding it's an interview, so
yeah.
just make it a pleasant experience overall, right? So I'm very happy you brought that up. So I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, it's the same. I have been in a lot of interviews on both sides, and sometimes even as a shadow for with another partner. And yeah, it's difficult. Doing great interviews is difficult because you want to make sure that the person is a great fit, but at the same time you want to get the best of it, about of him or her, to be sure that is comfortable enough. So we have some questions for you. We have
Okay.
a question about Justin professional experience. What is his favorite language? Why? What kind of complex project he had? Well, a lot of questions, Justin. uh,
Okay.
so professional experience, and what is your favorite language?
Okay. So I've been doing this for over 10 years as well.
Wow.
I can't count how long, but I mean, I could, but it would be a waste of time. So yeah, so I am mostly a back-end engineer. I've had many roles before in the past where I do full stack type of things. I build front-end applications, sometimes for fun, but I'm usually working on like large systems and building out infrastructure and been on ways to handle that. So currently, I'm working on a role where I'm building out tools and infrastructure for data scientists in order to process
Mm,
that data, provide them tools so that they can interact with their data and do their like batch processing, streamed jobs, service deployments, and so forth. So that's what I do right now. My favorite language, that's a bit of a tricky question just because like I wouldn't say I have a favorite language. I mostly use Python at the moment. There are lots of things I really like about it, but at the same time, I think that Python is as good as the people that you're working with because it is so open-ended. You can see lots of ways of doing things, and frankly, most of the ways of writing in Python are not the best in the context of working in an engineering team. So, for example, if I'm looking at how to do something, I start Googling up how to write something in Python, I might get results that are from statisticians or data scientists. And the code they write works really well for what they're doing. But I'm coming from the context as an engineer. The code they write might not be the best way to write it with regards to performance, maintainability, and stuff like that, right? So Python itself, great language, but the way it's used is way too open-ended. So I have a bias towards typed languages. And I used to do a lot of Java. Not the biggest fan, but it's kind of like it's too rigid. So I've been doing a lot of Golang at the moment. I find it's like a nice balance. It's very pleasant, but the surface area for what you would write Python applications for versus Golang applications for don't have the cleanest like intersection. Like there are some overlaps, but because of that, I can't just have this is my favorite language. I'm going to do it for everything. It's like use case specific, right?
Yeah, that's a great answer as well. It depends.
Yeah, it depends.
It depends.
As like all things.
Exactly. So we have some Messenger stream is asking, Justin, what is the English level of Midu? Midu is me. You could be honest. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, más o menos.
Oh.
Yeah.
So Justin, you have better Spanish than me English.
No, it's okay. Yo estudié por 3 años, pero yo olvidé todos.
But Justin, that's a surprise. What's happening here? Okay, so that's the hidden Spanish. You should return to your Spanish knowledge.
I should, but it's it's hard.
It's
But
hard.
your
Yeah.
English is very good. I have
Thank
no
you so much.
complaints about it. You are able to work in it professionally with no problems whatsoever.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So Dartiles is telling, can you give a feedback to Midu to improve? Don't worry.
Yeah.
You could be honest.
Like honestly, like I can't really think of too many things. Maybe it's because like, I'm coming in here like happy face, joining here.
Yeah.
I will talk about things that you did really well and things that I think that if you incorporated a little bit more, that would make it even better. Because so like, when I'm doing these interviews, there are certain things I'm looking for, right? I'm not just looking for someone to give the right answer.
Yeah.
I'm looking for someone to be able to convey their experience and convey decision making. Those are two important things because if you don't have experience, then that's a problem. So experience. Sometimes people will talk about the React projects they built, and when I ask them about them, it turns out they've just been doing like toy projects that they learned from like Medium articles, right? I need professional experience that's been battle tested. Very similar to what I talked about earlier with regards to deployment, right? If you've been building toy projects, you probably never really used like a full deployment process to get in production and understand the problems that you'll run into, right? Very common, like cores. Lots of first-time learners of front-end application run into cores issues, right? So having professional experience is so important because it shows you've run into certain problems, right? Now, the second thing I look for is with regards to problem solving. So I am of the opinion that as developers, as engineers, we are trying to be open-ended for how do we do things. We should not be prescriptive for how we solve problems. One person coming in, maybe they used to work at a really big company and they did things a certain way. They can't go to another smaller company and impose that on them. So you talked about this a lot with regards to how you would make decisions based off of like, are you a startup? How much time do you have? What is the team you're working with, right? All that stuff is really important. So that's great. I really like that. And I think if you can tie this in a little bit more with like professional experience as well, like I've done this before in the past, like where I had to do this explicitly, right? I think it would be useful, but at this point, I'm trying to like pull things from like an empty bucket. Like I really think you did really well, and I'm not just saying this. Well, I am just saying that, but you know what I mean. I think you did
Yeah,
really
yeah.
well because of those two things. So
Mm.
it's really hard for me to nitpick and cherry pick out like things that I think you would improve on, but there's always room for improvement, and being able to like fetch those things out will just like improve the overall quality of like the things you're talking about in general as well.
I think it's a great feedback. I mean, it's super important. I think it's a good piece of advice for everybody in order to put on the table your experience. As every time that you have the opportunity to show your real experience, I think it's a great piece of advice for the people. It's super important because, as
Yeah.
you said, it's like sometimes it's not only about code. It depends, and if you put it's not about wrong answers, it's about good explanations, and it's good about making mistakes, because the only way to learn is about mistakes. You don't learn about making everything perfect, and that's not how it works. So I think that giving experience about, yeah, that's a problem that I faced, and the way to solve this was that, and we were wrong, but we learned about
Yeah.
this. I think that's great. That's what we are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you. So another last question, and that's the last one, Justin. Última
Okay.
pregunta. Just one.
Okay. No
Uh,
problem.
what steps will remain when you become a feature developer and a company is interested in you at Arc? Do you consider relocation for LATAM applicants? I don't think so because it's remote, but
Okay, let's see. What steps remain when you become a feature developer and a company is interested? Okay. So I'm going to
imagine
preface.
that I passed the process.
Right. So I'm going to preface this really quick by saying like I handle a lot of the interviewing pieces, and that like with regards to the processes, like afterwards, like these things can change. I can tell you the state of the way things are now, but for more like detailed answers and stuff to this, there are like better people at Arc that I can direct you to. However, the answer at the moment is once you've passed the assessment at Arc, you are good to go. Like we
Mhm.
typically don't ask you to that's all we need from Arc. We know your background, we know your strengths, and we're not going to ask you to like go through an assessment again for a new role. It doesn't make sense, right?
Mhm.
So there's that. It's a one-time thing. Now, to become a featured developer, this is a special program that we have at Arc where you're featured for a 2-week cycle. It means that you have your profile built out on Arc. We support you throughout this process. It's a 2-week cycle. And during this, companies who come to Arc will be looking at profiles from featured developers, and they will apply to you. It's the reverse of your typical model for job applications, right? During this process, we also provide coaching at Arc, free 30 minutes. You come in and you can ask any questions you like. How can I fix my resume? How can I fix my introduction? I'm having troubles with these types of questions interviewers ask me. So we want to help you make you successful, right? Because Arc doesn't cost anything for you as a developer. We get paid when the client hires you on. So we are extra incentivized to make sure that you find a role that you like, that you'll be successful with, that you will love, right? So there's that, right? One-time assessment at the moment from Arc. You become featured for 2 weeks. If you don't find a role in 2 weeks, Arc will reach out to you to ask if you want to be bumped down the list for the next 2 weeks. And it's like a for loop, right? When you
Mhm.
break depends on when you want to stop or when you find a role, right? Those are your break conditions. And for relocation, we do not offer any relocation because, like what Miguel said, we are a remote focused organization. However, when you find a full-time role through a company, they might offer you relocation through the company themselves, right?
Mhm.
We don't manage any of that, but that is a possibility based off of who you end up working for.
Interesting. Awesome, Justin. Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure and very interesting, the tech interview. I was a bit nervous, but thank you so much for doing it very, very well. I felt very comfortable, and thank you so much for being here and answer all the questions and doing the tech interview. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
I hope to see you here sometime.
Yeah, I mean, if afterwards you check the chat and people aren't like angry at me because I
No, no,
said
they are
something,
not. No,
then
no,
you know I'd be happy to come back. But
they are
oh,
super happy with you. They are super happy.
okay,
Yeah, thank you,
awesome.
Justin. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, thank you. A lot of thanks.
Yes, you're
A lot of
welcome.
people. They
Ex
they are telling you, Justin, te amo, mi amor. Well,
oh,
that's too
oh,
much, but
muchas
it's something
gracias.
about love. Well, thank you so much, Justin.
All right, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Thanks for sharing my presence on your stream, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
All right,
Take
bye
care. Thank you
everyone.
so much.
See
Bye.
you.